Imagine a quiet autumn afternoon on the rugged Montana plains. A lone war veteran, haunted by battles abroad and grief at home, stands face to face with a mysterious wild Mustang. When the powerful horse leads him deep into a shadowy forest, what he finds inside a forgotten cabin will leave you speechless. It's a discovery straight out of a classic Clint Eastwood Western, a moment of courage, redemption, and the spirit of the American frontier. If you love the grit of John Wayne, the thrill of unexpected heroes, and the loyalty that can only come from an extraordinary animal, you won't want to miss this incredible true story. Stick around to the end to uncover a secret decades in the making. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us keep these amazing stories coming. They say a wild horse rarely seeks out human company unless compelled by something deeper than mere instinct. One late autumn afternoon, under the wide skies of Longview, Montana, a lone Mustang appeared at the fraying edge of a horse ranch that had once known grander days. Its coat, dusted with the ochre of the dry plains, gleamed in the waning sunlight. Dark, intelligent eyes regarded the place with an almost purposeful calm, as though the creature was waiting for someone specific. Not far off, a man named Colton Hayes stood near a battered fence, just recently arrived home from active duty in a distant desert war zone. He had returned not only from the battles overseas, but also from the somber duty of laying his father, William Hayes, to rest. Guilt weighed on him. He had not been there when his father drew his final breath. He had not heard the old man's parting words or even offered comfort in those last moments. Now the stark reality of the ranch, the chipped paint on the barn doors, and the scraggly shapes of half-starved horses brought Colton a fresh wave of remorse. The Hayes Ranch, once a proud establishment where William bred champion quarter horses, had fallen into dire neglect in recent years. Weathered boards hung loose from the barn walls. Ragged pieces of tarp were tacked haphazardly over gaps in the roof. Weeds stood tall and defiant in the paddocks, rising to Colton's waist in some spots. Where once robust thoroughbreds had grazed, only a few nervous mares lingered, their ribs showing through patchy coats. Colton felt a pang of memory, the days of his youth when the ranch bustled with neighing horses, helpful ranch hands, and the confident presence of his father guiding every endeavor. But William Hayes was no longer here, and no hired help remained. The ranch was as hollow as Colton's heart felt after all those years away, swallowed up in desert deployments and a father-son rift that never fully mended. Leaning against a rotting fence post, Colton tried to gather himself. His father's old ranch truck, a 1980s model with more rust than paint, had barely made the drive from the bus station. All around, the wind carried the faint scent of pine and the sharper tang of impending winter. Longview would soon see snow. Pausing to let the wind ruffle his hair, Colton closed his eyes. He could almost imagine his father's voice, low and patient, reminding him of chores that needed doing before the cold fully set in. Yet it was not William Hayes's voice he heard next, but the soft, almost delicate snort of a horse standing just beyond the fallen fence rails. Opening his eyes, Colton saw the Mustang for the first time, an animal that seemed out of place, yet oddly determined. The horse's mane tumbled over its neck in windswept tangles, and an old scar laced its left hind leg. It did not shy away upon meeting Colton's gaze. Instead, it stomped a hoof in the dust, head held high. At any other time, Colton might have dismissed it as a stray from the surrounding wild herds. But something about the Mustang's stance, about its piercing look, tugged at him. Moments stretched in silence. A sudden gust rattled the empty barn doors. The horse tossed its head as if beckoning. Colton, so recently separated from the Marine Corps, felt a familiar jolt of adrenaline, the same awareness that had kept him alive on the battlefield. It was as though an unspoken conversation passed between them, man and Mustang. With no conscious decision, Colton found himself stepping closer, wanting to see what it was the horse seemed eager to reveal. Colton Hayes had worn the Marine uniform for nearly 12 years, an experience that left scars beyond the physical. His time in the Middle East deserts had taught him vigilance, discipline, and how to quell fear with decisive action. But it had also robbed him of the simple joys of home. He once held illusions of returning to an intact family, a father proud of his service. Yet letters from his father, William, had always been few and terse. Perhaps life on the ranch was demanding, Or perhaps father and son had simply grown apart, both too stubborn to reach out more than halfway. Now with William gone, Colton found himself in a vast emptiness. The crisp air of Montana contrasted sharply with the scorching dust of his last deployment. Each morning since arriving, he awakened to the uneasy hush of the ranch. The old house's interior was cold, and only a threadbare couch remained in the living room. The walls bore old photographs, some of a smiling boy perched on a pony, others featuring William Hayes accepting ribbons for champion horses at county fairs. Colton's chest tightened when he noticed them. He could barely recall the events. The pictures felt like glimpses of a life he'd abandoned. During his first few days home, Colton busied himself with chores that needed immediate attention. He hauled hay to the underfed horses, grimacing at their gaunt flanks. He replaced missing boards in the corral fence, though new wood was scarce and funds even scarcer. Each task was a battle against time and neglect. But at night, the quiet hours brought haunting dreams. He'd bolt upright on the old couch, drenched in sweat, hearing distant echoes of mortar blasts or the final cries of wounded comrades. Sometimes the nightmares merged with half-formed memories of him and his father arguing right before he enlisted. Colton would sit there, breathing hard, the darkness of the ranch house closing in around him. Despite the pain, something about Montana's wide skies and the promise of open land gave him a sliver of peace. The local townsfolk had greeted him politely in the grocery or gas station. Some recognized his last name, recalling William Hayes's reputation for fine horses. Others eyed him with a mix of sympathy and curiosity, perhaps noting the fatigued tension in his posture. "Thank you for your service," they'd say, or, "Your father was a good man, sorry for your loss." Colton appreciated the kindness but didn't linger in conversation. He felt unmoored, uncertain how to bridge the gap between the man he'd become and the life he'd left behind. He couldn't help wondering if his father's last days were spent in loneliness. By the time word of William's deteriorating health reached Colton, it was too late for him to secure leave. The funeral passed without him. Now he carried not only grief but also a sense of unfinished business. As a Marine, he'd been taught to accomplish the mission at all costs. Yet there was no commanding officer here, no clear orders to follow. The ranch was both his inheritance and his burden. These thoughts churned in his mind as he watched the mysterious Mustang flick its tail and stamp the ground. The animal seemed oddly expectant, as though it sensed Colton's turmoil. Torn between curiosity and a hint of wariness, Colton edged nearer. That was when the Mustang huffed sharply, swished its tail again, and turned toward the stand of pines that bordered the western edge of the property. Giving one last, powerful shake of its mane, the horse ambled forward as if leading the way. Colton hesitated, an internal voice cautioning him about tangling with a wild animal. Then something deeper, perhaps the same intuition that had saved his life in combat, urged him on. Throwing a quick glance at the sun's position, he realized there were a few hours left before dusk. Enough time to see where the horse was going. Without another thought, he stepped over the broken fence, letting the Mustang guide him toward the dense ribbon of forest. As Colton moved past the ranch's dilapidated boundary, he was struck by how quickly the terrain shifted. The tall grass and straggly weeds gave way to a floor of pine needles and soft loam. The air turned cooler under the canopy, thick with the scent of resin and damp earth. Rays of late afternoon sunshine slanted through the branches, creating ethereal beams that illuminated motes of dust. The Mustang, which Colton mentally nicknamed Liberty, kept a steady pace a few yards ahead. The horse's left hind leg favored the ground slightly, indicating a past injury. Yet Liberty's gait was purposeful, each step taken with an unspoken confidence. More than once the animal would pause, looking back at Colton as if to ensure he followed. In the hush of the forest, the crunch of Colton's boots sounded louder than it had on the ranch's packed dirt. He couldn't recall the last time he ventured so deep into the pines. As a boy, he'd occasionally wander near this area, spurred by a child's imagination of hidden creeks or secret hideaways. William Hayes, ever protective, warned him not to stray too far. "Forest can be unpredictable," he used to say. "Respect it, don't fear it." Colton felt a twist of nostalgia, remembering how he had once believed his father invincible. Signs of a faint trail began to emerge, perhaps an old logging route or a path once used for boundary rides. Broken twigs and patches of moss suggested it had been neglected for years. Liberty navigated with sure-footed grace, forging a route around boulders and shrubs that blocked the way. Colton followed, his senses on high alert, as though expecting an ambush. The silent watchfulness reminded him uncomfortably of nighttime patrols overseas, where every sound or movement could signal danger. Yet here, in the heart of the Montana forest, the threat felt more mysterious than menacing. A breeze rustled the canopy, carrying the distant caw of a crow. Occasionally, a pine cone dropped to the ground, causing Colton to glance around, heart pounding. Each time he reminded himself he was back in his home state, far from the stifling desert heat or the screams of incoming artillery. After almost an hour, the forest began to thin again, revealing a slight downward slope. Liberty slowed, ears perked in interest. Through the gaps in the trees, Colton made out the silhouette of a structure, small, almost swallowed by the undergrowth. His pulse quickened in intrigue and unease. The building appeared to be a cabin, its once sturdy logs now battered by time and neglect. The roof sagged, and the front porch looked like it might collapse under the weight of a single step. Brambles choked the narrow clearing around the structure, spiky vines tugging at the rotting porch steps. The windows, if they were intact, lay concealed behind filth and shadows. A weathered sign hung crookedly near the door, but the lettering was illegible from this distance. Liberty snorted, tossing its head toward the cabin, as if presenting it to Colton. He swallowed, aware of a low-level dread crawling up his spine. It was one thing to follow a horse out of curiosity, another to actually step into an abandoned place that emanated an air of sorrow and neglect. The Mustang took a few steps closer, then stopped, waiting. Colton looked around, verifying the quiet. He saw no tracks of other humans. The sense of isolation was almost overwhelming. Still, he couldn't bring himself to turn back. Something was urging him onward, a quiet but insistent pull to investigate whatever lay behind that crooked door. Drawing a deep breath, Colton approached the porch. Weeds snagged at his ankles, and loose planks creaked beneath his boots. The door, a heavy slab of wood scarred by weather, bore a rusted lock. He tried the handle, half expecting it to be jammed. To his mild surprise, the mechanism gave a feeble click, and the door shifted inward by an inch. A dank, musty odor wafted out, making him wrinkle his nose. Liberty stood just behind him, the horse's large brown eyes surveying the dark interior. An odd sense of solidarity washed over Colton. He felt less alone, even if his companion was a silent Mustang. He turned on the small flashlight he always carried in his jacket, a habit from his military days. The beam cut through dust, swirling in the stale air. The cabin's front room was cramped and neglected, with pieces of collapsed furniture scattered about. A rickety table leaned against one wall, and the remains of a chair lay in splinters. The floor, coated in dirt and debris, looked treacherous in places where the boards had warped. An ancient wood stove, its door hanging ajar, squatted in one corner, redolent of rust. Colton stepped carefully, testing each plank before putting his weight on it, while Liberty remained at the threshold, as if uncertain about crossing inside. A narrow hallway stretched beyond the main room, its walls lined with faded wallpaper that might have once been floral. Shadows congealed there, thick enough to make Colton's skin prickle. He was about to proceed when a faint sound reached his ears, a noise that could have been a soft moan or the creak of warped timber. Heart thumping, Colton called out, "Anyone here?" The echo that returned was eerie, hollow, yet not entirely devoid of response. He followed the sound, stepping over broken floorboards. Near the hallway's end, a door appeared to be stuck or locked. Trying the handle did nothing. Pressing his ear against the wood, he picked up what he thought was shallow breathing, punctuated by the faintest rasp. His pulse spiked with a surge of alarm. Someone might be trapped inside. Years of training kicked in, and Colton took a few steps back to scan the area for something he could use as a lever. He found a rusted crowbar among a pile of debris. Wedging it against the latch, he gave a firm heave. The ancient wood groaned in protest. Another forceful shove, and the door broke free, splintering where the lock had corroded in place. Dust billowed, choking the air. When Colton's flashlight beam finally pierced the darkness of that cramped room, what he saw made his stomach lurch. A woman lay curled on the floor, her clothes torn and her skin pale as candle wax. Tangled hair clung to a face drawn with suffering. Her breathing came in ragged, shallow bursts. At first, Colton feared she might be deceased, but then her eyelids flickered. "Hey," he called softly, dropping to his knees beside her. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" His voice reverberated in the tiny space, but she offered no coherent reply, just a feeble whimper. Carefully, he pressed two fingers to her neck, feeling for a pulse. Weak, but there. Relief flooded him, though it was tinged with urgency. If she'd been trapped here for days, dehydration or infection could be near fatal. Gritting his teeth, Colton pulled out his phone. No signal, which wasn't surprising in this remote corner of the forest. He needed to get her outside, find help. Cradling her head gently, he managed to scoop her into his arms. Though she was slight in stature, unconscious weight is heavy and unwieldy. He navigated back down the hallway, wincing each time the floor creaked ominously. Liberty, still at the entry, nickered anxiously upon seeing them emerge. Outside the cabin, the early evening light glowed gold, a stark contrast to the suffocating dimness within. Colton laid the woman on a relatively clear patch of ground, away from the porch's precarious boards. Gently, he propped her against the trunk of a gnarled cedar, rummaging through his jacket for a small water bottle. He trickled a few drops onto her cracked lips, hoping to coax her into swallowing. Her eyelids fluttered and she made a weak sound, the kind of soft moan that comes from the borderland between unconsciousness and delirium. Colton murmured reassurances, though he wasn't sure whether she could hear. His mind raced through the steps he'd been trained for. Keep the casualty warm, administer water carefully, seek immediate medical help. But how? The cabin's location was remote, likely inaccessible by standard vehicles unless they knew exactly where to go. He scanned the surrounding undergrowth for any sign of a path that rescue personnel could navigate. His phone stubbornly showed 0 bars. In the distance, Liberty pawed the ground, exhaling nervous snorts. Setting his jaw, Colton realized he'd have to move fast. If the woman's condition was dire, time was of the essence. Scooping her up again, he turned to the Mustang, somehow hoping the horse understood. "We need to get back," he said aloud, though obviously the animal wouldn't respond in words. Still, the look in Liberty's eyes seemed almost empathetic. Carefully, Colton maneuvered around shrubs and low-hanging branches, holding the woman close while also coaxing the Mustang to remain near. It was slow going. The uneven terrain threatened his footing, and the woman occasionally moaned, possibly from pain. Every so often, Liberty would trot a few steps ahead, then pause, glancing back as if to ensure they were following the right route. At one point, the horse led them around a fallen log, too large for Colton to easily climb over with his burden. He marveled at how seamlessly the Mustang guided him, as if an unseen bond had formed. Twilight descended by the time they broke out of the forest and reached the edge of the Hayes Ranch. The sky was a deep violet, stars pricking through the last remnants of daylight. Colton's chest burned from exertion, and his arms trembled under the woman's weight. "Just a bit farther," he whispered to no one in particular, or perhaps to both her and Liberty. Back at the ranch yard, he laid the woman gently on a patch of grassy dirt, quickly retrieving his phone from his pocket. By some miracle, a single bar of reception flickered. He dialed 911. The operator's voice crackled with static, but it was enough. Struggling against poor reception, Colton provided directions. "Hayes Ranch, off County Road 14, western boundary near the pine forest. Found an unconscious woman. Hurry." Hanging up, he felt a surge of relief. Outside the house, the Mustang waited, ears flicking at the distant wail of approaching sirens. He hadn't expected the emergency response to arrive so swiftly, but perhaps the local authorities had a search and rescue protocol in place. Sure enough, red and blue lights soon pierced the darkness. An ambulance, followed by a sheriff's vehicle, rumbled across the rickety fence line. Medics jumped out, pulling a stretcher from the ambulance. Colton guided them to the woman, his heart pounding from both exhaustion and urgency. The paramedics, one tall and graying, the other a calm-faced woman, checked the unconscious figure's vitals. Oxygen mask, IV fluids, questions that tumbled out in quick succession. "When did you find her? How long has she been like this? Any injuries you can see?" Colton answered as best he could, though he had little information. All he knew was that if he hadn't arrived when he did, she might not have survived. Within minutes, the medics loaded the unknown woman into the ambulance, promising to take her to Longview General Hospital. A deputy, Officer Cabral, stepped over to Colton, making a quick assessment of the disheveled man and the Mustang lingering in the background. "Heard you found her in some abandoned cabin," Cabral said, pen scratching on a small notepad. "Mind telling me exactly what happened?" Colton recounted the strange events. The injured Mustang appearing at his ranch, leading him into the forest, discovering the cabin and the locked room, and his subsequent rescue of the woman. The deputy's eyebrows rose skeptically at the part about the horse. "You're telling me the horse guided you all the way there?" "It did," Colton affirmed, voice steady despite the surreal nature of his own words. "It kept waiting for me, like it knew." Cabral nodded slowly, glancing at Liberty. "We've had stranger stories out here, but that's right up there," he said, then quickly scribbled more notes. "We'll get a team to look at that cabin in daylight. Could be someone living there, or maybe it's just an old property left to rot. Either way, we'll figure out how she ended up locked inside." When the deputy stepped away to speak to another officer, Colton let out a long breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The ambulance, lights flashing, started to roll back toward the main road. He felt a wrench of uncertainty. He didn't even know her name, yet he was deeply entangled in this unfolding crisis. A hollow quiet descended once the vehicles left, punctuated only by the distant rumble of engines fading into the night. The ranch seemed darker now, the weight of the incident settling heavily on Colton's shoulders. Liberty, still standing nearby, pawed at the ground as if sensing his turmoil. In the glare of the barn's single floodlight, the Mustang's coat looked rugged and brave. "Thank you," Colton murmured to the horse, feeling a little foolish. Still, a strong sense of gratitude pulsed in his chest. Without Liberty's intervention, he would never have ventured into that forest, and the woman, whoever she was, would likely have died alone. He reached out cautiously, laying a hand on the Mustang's neck. To his surprise, the horse tolerated the contact, exhaling a warm breath that misted in the chilly air. The moment was fleeting. Liberty soon pulled away, trotting a few yards off to graze in the moonlit grass. Colton watched, half expecting the animal to disappear into the night as swiftly as it had come. But the Mustang remained, as though it had chosen the ranch for reasons known only to itself. With nothing more to do that evening, Colton trudged into the old ranch house. Fatigue seeped into his bones, though his mind whirled with questions. Who was that woman? Why was she in that shack? And what had compelled Liberty to find him just in time? Before collapsing onto the worn couch, he placed a call to the hospital, hoping for any scrap of news. The nurse on duty politely informed him that the woman was in critical but stable condition, identity still unknown, and that he could check in tomorrow for updates. With that, Colton set the phone aside, stared at the ceiling beams, and let exhaustion claim him. Through the window, he glimpsed Liberty's silhouette under the moonlight, standing sentinel over the ranch in ghostly silence. Morning dawned with a brittle chill that hinted winter was not far off. Colton woke to a stiff back. Sleeping on the couch had done him no favors. Outside, the sky bore streaks of pale rose and gold, illuminating a thin layer of frost on the ranch yard. Rubbing his tired eyes, he wondered if he'd dreamed the entire episode. But when he peered through the window, he caught sight of Liberty near the half-broken fence. The Mustang was still there, pawing the frosty ground for any lingering tufts of grass. After a hasty breakfast, black coffee, and a piece of toast, Colton headed out to tend the ranch's other horses. They nickered anxiously, pressing their muzzles through the gaps in the corral, seeking the feed he carried in a dented bucket. Their hunger reminded him that the ranch itself was on precarious footing. Bills must be piling up, the land was in disrepair, and he had neither the manpower nor the money to restore everything alone. He resolved to sell off some of the older equipment, maybe. Or perhaps he could see if any local stable could take the horses in temporarily. He was in the midst of these thoughts when a soft snort made him turn. Liberty was standing just outside the corral, ears forward. The Mustang's gaze flicked to the feed bucket, then back to Colton, as though politely asking for a share. Chuckling at his own anthropomorphism, Colton scooped out a small portion of oats and offered it. Liberty stepped closer, muzzle quivering against Colton's open palm. A warm satisfaction flooded through him at the trust implied in that gesture. Not long after, Colton decided it was time to head into Longview to check on the unidentified woman. The drive in William Hayes's rusty pickup was an exercise in nerves. The old engine sputtered and threatened to stall at every turn. The heater barely functioned, blowing lukewarm air that did little to dispel the cold. Still, Colton couldn't help feeling a surge of nostalgia. He remembered riding in this truck as a boy, his father lecturing him about how to handle the clutch, how to respect the power of machinery, how to keep the ranch afloat. Those lessons felt distant now, like radio signals from a past life. Longview General Hospital was a modest building on the outskirts of the small downtown. Colton parked by a row of evergreens, stepping inside with a sense of apprehension. A friendly nurse directed him to the ICU area, explaining that the woman was still unconscious but had stabilized overnight. The name on her file, gleaned from a slim wallet found in her pocket, was April Winslow. The nurse ushered him into a narrow room. April lay under a pale blue blanket, IVs snaking into her arms. Her complexion was still wan, but the oxygen mask had been replaced by a simple nasal cannula. A faint beep of monitors broke the hush. Colton couldn't help feeling a wave of relief that she seemed to be in better shape than when he'd first found her. He was about to leave, unsure if his presence would help, when April stirred. Her eyelids fluttered. Though still groggy, her gaze settled on him. She tried to speak, voice cracking. "You found me," she managed. Caught off guard, Colton nodded. "Yeah, you were in a bad way, out in that old cabin." A flicker of confusion crossed her face. "Cabin? I remember. The door wouldn't open. Everything went dark." A weak cough interrupted her. She swallowed hard, then asked, "Where am I now?" "Longview General," Colton replied, stepping closer. "I'm Colton Hayes. You've been out for almost a day. The doctors say you're dehydrated and have some injuries, but you should recover." She closed her eyes momentarily, processing. "Thank you." A tremor edged into her voice. "Nobody else would have known where I was." He hesitated, then added softly, "A horse led me there, a wild Mustang. I wouldn't have found you otherwise." April frowned as if trying to reconcile that information with her own memory. After a moment, she murmured, "I'm April Winslow." Her eyelids drooped in exhaustion. "I owe you more than I can say." "Ortwari." Colton opened his mouth to respond, but the nurse gently ushered him out, saying April needed rest. In the hallway, he leaned against the wall, exhaling shakily. So many questions buzzed in his head. Why was she in that cabin? Was she alone? Did she have any family around? And in the center of it all, the improbable role of Liberty. Later that morning, on his way back to the truck, Colton nearly collided with a woman in a white coat. She was carrying a clipboard and wore a kind but brisk expression. A small name tag identified her as Dr. Helena Rowe. Recognizing Colton as the man who brought in the unidentified patient, she stopped him. "Mr. Hayes, isn't it? I treated Ms. Winslow when she was admitted. Do you have a minute?" Colton nodded, bracing himself for bad news. But Dr. Rowe's demeanor was calm, if earnest. "Physically, Ms. Winslow is recovering. We suspect she was trapped in that cabin for at least 2 days, given the degree of dehydration. The real concern now is making sure she has support once she's discharged." "I don't know much about her," Colton admitted. "She only just woke up." Dr. Rowe's gaze flicked to her clipboard. "It might help for her to hear a familiar voice in the hospital over the next few days, even if that voice belongs to a newfound friend. She's going to be weak. Any stable presence could help. On Maybury." A rush of conflicting emotions hit Colton. He barely knew April, yet he was the one who found her. They shared a strange connection through that Mustang's intervention. He told Dr. Rowe he would do what he could, but he couldn't promise more until he learned about April's situation. As he drove back through Longview's modest main street, passing the diner, the post office, and the feed store, Colton couldn't shake the sense that destiny was at work. Growing up, he'd never put much stock in fate or cosmic signs. His father taught him to trust in hard work and common sense, but how else could he explain that a wild horse had arrived at the ranch precisely when April needed saving? The ranch felt emptier when he returned, though that was partly because he was more aware of it now. While the sun hung high in the sky, he walked the perimeter, taking stock of the tasks that would need immediate attention. The barns needed patching before winter. The feed supply was running low. Some of the horses were so spooked by neglect, they'd require gentle re-socializing. Eventually, Colton's path led him to the western boundary once more. He found Liberty there, grazing contentedly. The Mustang raised its head when Colton approached, large eyes reflecting quiet acknowledgement. I went to see her, Colton said, feeling a little self-conscious for speaking aloud. She's alive thanks to you. Liberty continued munching grass, but the flick of its ears suggested it was listening. Or maybe that was just Colton projecting. He couldn't help himself. He reached out again, stroking the Mustang's mane. He felt the coarse strands slip through his fingers, a tactile reminder of how real, how tangible this connection was becoming. A short while later, a battered county sheriff's SUV rumbled up the dirt driveway. Deputy Cabral emerged, removing his hat to greet Colton. "We checked that cabin," he said without preamble. "Doesn't look like anyone else was living there. Place is in shambles. Found some old paperwork in a back closet, references to the Winslow name. Did Ms. Winslow mention anything about that?" Colton shook his head. "She only just woke up, so no. Maybe she has family tied to the property?" "Could be," Cabral said, his gaze drifting to Liberty. "Anyway, I appreciate your cooperation. We might have more questions in the next few days. For now, we're just glad she made it." Colton nodded, a mix of relief and curiosity settling in his chest. Once Cabral left, Colton stood silently for a moment, then looked at Liberty again. "Well, my friend," he said, "it's not over yet." 2 days later, Colton stepped back into April Winslow's hospital room with a small bouquet of grocery store flowers. An awkward gesture, but it felt like the right thing to do. April was awake, propped on pillows, color slowly returning to her cheeks. Her eyes flicked to the flowers and a mild smile brushed her lips. "You brought me daisies?" she asked, voice still raspy but clearer than before. "It was either that or sunflowers," Colton replied, placing the bouquet on the small table by the window. "I wasn't sure which you'd prefer." April looked at the daisies, eyes distant. "They're nice. Thank you." An awkward silence stretched between them before Colton cleared his throat. "How are you feeling?" "Sore," she admitted, rolling her shoulders gingerly. "And I still get dizzy if I sit up too fast. But I'll survive." He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "That's good to hear. I, wanted to see if you remembered anything about that cabin. The sheriff found some old papers with your family's name on them. Maybe it belongs to you, or someone in your family." April's gaze grew guarded. She hesitated, then spoke quietly. "It was my grandfather's place, I think. The Winslow family had property around Longview ages ago. But my father left Montana a long time before I was born. There was some big rift, apparently. I only found out about the cabin through a series of old letters I stumbled on after he died." Colton digested that. "So you came here looking for answers?" A faint nod. "Yes. I thought maybe those letters or documents could tell me why he cut ties with his parents, why he never spoke of them." She swallowed hard. "I didn't expect to find a locked room and nearly die inside. The door jammed. My phone had no signal. It was stupid, really." "Not stupid," Colton said softly. "No one expects to get trapped like that. But what were you hoping to find in that old place?" April sighed, fiddling with the edge of the hospital blanket. "I guess I wanted closure. My father died with so many secrets. I thought if I could piece together our family's history, it would help me understand him. And maybe myself." Their eyes met, and for a moment, Colton felt a resonance in her words. He too had lost a father he never truly understood. The parallel made something in his chest tighten. "I get it," he offered gently. "I lost my father a few months ago. William Hayes. We didn't end on the best terms either." April's expression softened with empathy. A thoughtful silence followed, broken only by the quiet beep of the monitor. At length she mustered a small smile. "Dr. Rose said I might be released soon, but I have no clue where to go. There's not exactly a Winslow family mansion waiting for me, and I'm not in a hurry to go back to that cabin alone." Colton found himself speaking before he fully realized it. "You could stay at the Hayes Ranch for a while, if you don't mind the dust and the fact that it's not very luxurious. We've got space, and it's close enough for you to recover and decide what you want to do next." April blinked, clearly surprised by his offer. "That's generous. Are you sure I won't be in the way?" He shook his head. "It's just me, and a few neglected horses, and one Mustang that might be part guardian angel, part troublemaker. You'd be doing me a favor, honestly. I'm not too good at conversation these days." Despite the gravity of everything she had been through, April managed a genuine smile. All right, Colton, I accept. A week passed, during which April Winslow regained enough strength to leave the hospital. Though Dr. Rowe advised caution, April insisted she'd be fine, especially if she had a secure place to stay. True to his word, Colton brought her to the Hayes Ranch. The battered pickup truck rattled along the dirt driveway, its engine protesting every bump. April sat quietly in the passenger seat, taking in the surroundings with a mixture of curiosity and residual weariness. When they pulled up to the main house, a modest, single-story log structure with a sagging porch, April exhaled. I haven't spent much time on ranches, but this feels peaceful, she commented. Colton offered a shy nod. It's not much these days. My father let a lot of things go, or maybe he just couldn't keep up in his later years. I only got back recently, so there's a ton of work to do. Still, I figure it's home. Might as well make the best of it. Inside, the house looked simple but clean enough, thanks to Colton's recent attempts to tidy up. He guided April to a small guest room that once served as a storage space. He'd managed to clear out boxes and old tack, placing a functional bed and a small dresser. Though the walls bore faded wallpaper and the single window stuck when opened, April thanked him warmly. Over the following days, a quiet routine developed. April would rest for long stretches but insisted on helping where she could. She'd wash dishes or sweep the porch while Colton tended to the horses. They didn't talk much at first about deeper matters, like her father's mysterious past or Colton's military experiences. Instead, they discussed simple, immediate things: how best to repair the barn's roof before the snow fell, which feed store in town had better prices, or what time the mail usually came. The star of the ranch, however, was Liberty. The Mustang seemed to have officially adopted the property as its domain, while it kept a respectful distance from the other horses, who seemed both curious and nervous about this untamed newcomer. Liberty had no qualms about following Colton around the yard. Sometimes it would stand near April as she sat on the porch, letting her stroke its muzzle if she held out a cautious hand. Day by day, the horse allowed more contact, yet always maintained an air of guarded independence. One brisk morning, April found Colton brushing Liberty near the half-repaired fence. She approached slowly, the chill air reddening her cheeks. I didn't know Mustangs could be this friendly, she remarked, slipping her hands into a warm jacket. They usually aren't, Colton replied, patting Liberty's flank. I've been around horses my whole life, but this one, it's different. More perceptive, I guess. Dr. Rowe recommended a veterinarian friend, Dr. Aaron Holt, who might check Liberty's leg injury. Maybe we can see if he was once owned by someone. He's got scars that suggest a saddle might have been on him in the past. April nodded, looking thoughtful. If that's the case, maybe the horse has its own story, like it was cast out or escaped. Colton glanced at her, noting the parallel with her own uncertain family history, or his own regrets with his father. Yeah, maybe so, he said quietly. We'll find out soon enough. In that moment, the early sun glinted off Liberty's mane, and Colton caught April watching the horse with a faint wistfulness. He realized they all carried invisible baggage. The Mustang with its old wounds, April with her unanswered questions, and Colton with the sting of lost time and unspoken words to his late father. And somehow, fate had brought them together. Autumn matured into early winter, painting Montana's skies with copper sunsets and crisp mornings that promised snow. Colton and April settled into a rhythm that felt strangely like they had known each other for years. Some evenings after dinner, they would linger in the living room, the dim lamp casting shadows on the walls. April would sometimes recount snippets of the old letters she'd read from her father, mentioning hints about the Winslow homestead and the harsh disagreements that drove him away from Longview. Though her health improved, the emotional toll of those revelations left her pensive. Meanwhile, Colton struggled with the ranch's financial tangles. Each attempt to contact the feed suppliers or bank ended in the same polite but firm reminder of overdue payments. The ranch might need to sell some land or horses just to stay afloat. Frustration mounted each time he realized how unprepared he was for the everyday realities of ranch ownership after a decade of military life. He would sometimes catch himself snapping at minor inconveniences, a squeaking door hinge or a fence post that refused to stay upright, and then regret it instantly. April, sensing his turmoil, offered to help wherever she could. Though her body was still regaining strength, her presence had a soothing effect. She'd remind him gently, one thing at a time, or, your father wouldn't want you to break yourself over this. He'd grumble half-heartedly, but her words lingered, easing the knot of tension in his chest. When Dr. Aaron Holt visited to examine Liberty, he confirmed the Mustang had an old wound on its hind leg, likely from barbed wire or some similar hazard. It had healed cleanly. No microchip, the vet said with a shrug, packing up his kit. Whatever brand or papers this horse once had, they're long gone. If no one claims him, you could adopt him officially. Colton squinted thoughtfully at Liberty, who stood a few yards away, ears flicking in curiosity. Adopt sounded too formal for a horse that appeared to come and go as it pleased, but the notion comforted him. He nodded, silently resolving that if anyone tried to take Liberty away without cause, they'd have a fight on their hands. In between daily ranch chores and April's recovery, they often found themselves discussing the cabin. April was determined to return to that remote place now that she was stronger. I left in such a hurry, she confessed one night, and I know there might be more letters or documents hidden there, pieces of my father's story. I need closure. Though the memory of the stifling darkness still made her shudder, April's resolve was unwavering. Colton understood perfectly. He, too, yearned for closure of his own, especially with the swirling questions about his father's final years. The next morning, they packed a small kit, bottled water, a first aid box, flashlights, gloves, and saddled up two of the ranch's calmer horses. Liberty followed behind them, free as ever, as they traversed the trail toward the old cabin. The journey through the forest felt different this time. The undergrowth was thinning under the colder weather, the looming pines crackled in the breeze, and the ground held a mosaic of fallen needles. Colton rode in silence, occasionally glancing at April to make sure she wasn't tiring. She looked determined, if cautious. Liberty occasionally trotted ahead, guiding them around tricky terrain. By midday, they arrived at the clearing where the Winslow cabin stood. The newly bare branches revealed its crumbling outline more clearly than before. Stopping their horses at a safe distance, Colton and April dismounted. Liberty snorted, peering at the sagging porch as though remembering the night it battered its way inside to help. Clutching each other's gaze for reassurance, they stepped toward the threshold. Both wondered what secrets still lay in wait within those rotting walls, and how those secrets might change everything. The worn door to the Winslow cabin groaned under its own weight as April Winslow and Colton Hayes stepped cautiously inside. Dust motes swirled in the pale light that filtered through cracks in the log walls. Although April had last seen this cramped interior under the worst of circumstances, trapped, dehydrated, and on the verge of passing out, the place looked even more forlorn now in the cold clarity of daylight. A brief chill prickled the back of her neck as she caught sight of the corner where she'd collapsed. The floor still bore the stains of damp and rot, while the residual odor of mildew lingered in the stagnant air. Despite these reminders, she inhaled slowly and steadied herself, determined not to let fear win. Her father's secret life, or at least what little she knew of it, was entwined with these decaying walls. She refused to leave without gathering more information. Colton raised his flashlight, scanning the rafters and corners. "We'll be careful," he said gently, half to himself and half to April. "Some parts of the floor might be unstable. Watch your step." The night he'd rescued her, he had only searched enough to find April and bring her out alive. Now they intended a more thorough exploration. The first room had a sagging wooden table, two broken chairs, and pieces of shattered glass from what might once have been a mirror. The wallpaper hung in peeling strips, revealing old water stains beneath. April's flashlight illuminated crooked picture frames on one wall, their photographs long since damaged by moisture. She reached for one, but the paper disintegrated at her touch. "Let's check the back rooms," Colton suggested. "That's where the sheriff found old paperwork." April nodded. She followed him down a short hallway that ended in a room with a partially caved-in ceiling. The exposed rafters dripped with the residue of rot. A musty odor curled around them, reminding her of how the door had jammed when she'd first come. She was relieved to see that the sheriff's initial investigation had left some footprints in the dust, enough to confirm no recent squatters were living here. But no thorough cleanup had taken place. Stacks of wooden crates and soggy cardboard boxes remained unopened along the walls. Liberty, the Mustang, who had guided Colton here that fateful night, had waited outside with the other horses. Once or twice, they heard the horse's hoof steps on the porch or a soft snort drifting in through the half-broken window. There was something comforting in Liberty's presence, a steadying reminder that they weren't entirely alone. Colton nudged aside a cluster of fallen planks. Beneath them lay a small chest bound by rusted hinges. "Check this out," he said, voice hushed. His fingers traced the lid carefully, testing whether it was locked. The padlock, if it had ever been functional, had corroded into a lump of metal. With a gentle tug, the lock snapped off and the chest popped open. Inside, they found a cache of letters packed in weathered envelopes, along with a small leather-bound journal. April's heart skipped a beat. Her father's handwriting might be in one of these, or possibly her grandfather's. She felt a jolt of both anticipation and dread. What if these pages held answers too painful to bear? Yet there was no turning back. If she truly wanted the full story, she had to face whatever secrets lay waiting. "Let's bring this out into the light," Colton said, lifting the chest. "We can sort it on the porch." With great care, they carried the chest and a few loose boxes they'd found to the cabin's porch, where daylight and fresh air prevailed. As they stepped outside, Liberty snorted in curious welcome. April sat cross-legged on the top step, chest in front of her. She couldn't deny the tremor in her hands as she reached for the first envelope. They spent the next hour sifting through a disjointed tapestry of family lore. Many letters were dated from decades prior, referencing mundane affairs, property taxes, farm equipment, veterinarian bills. But as April dug deeper, hints of conflict emerged. Fragments of argument about money, property lines, and personal choices that had once torn the Winslow family apart. One letter bore an angry scrawl accusing someone, the name was smudged, of undermining Pa's will. Another letter, penned in gentler script, pleaded with Thomas to reconcile before it was too late. "Thomas Winslow," April muttered. "That was my father's name. He left this place, moved to Chicago for a new job. All my life, he barely mentioned Montana. I never knew why until I found his old letters." She swallowed hard. "It makes more sense now. There was a huge fight. Looks like they cut each other off." Colton, kneeling beside her on the porch, flipped through a stack of receipts and typed legal documents. "Here's something," he said, eyes narrowing. "It's from a law office in Longview, talking about a contested inheritance." He scanned the text. "It mentions your father wanting no claim to the land, so long as certain conditions were met, but the rest is too water-damaged to read." A leaden feeling weighed on April's chest. So he gave up everything, walked away for good. Why, though? Was it guilt? Anger? There must be more. Setting aside the legal papers, she reached for the leather-bound journal, carefully prying it open. Most pages were covered in spidery handwriting, possibly her grandfather's, referencing the day-to-day workings of the property. A typical entry read, "Mended fence near creek. Mare gave birth to a healthy colt," followed by a date from the 1970s. But occasionally the tone shifted, growing tense. "Thomas stormed off again, threatened to leave for good. Can't keep this family together if nobody listens." Reading that, April closed her eyes. She pictured her father as a young man, filled with frustration or sorrow, feeling trapped in a life he didn't want. How many times had she sensed a quiet sadness in him growing up, never fully explained? "I wish he'd told me," she whispered, voice trembling. "Even if it hurt, it would have been better than all these unanswered questions." Colton placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his presence solid and grounding. "Sometimes people hide old wounds because they think they're protecting the ones they love." He spoke with a soft intensity that suggested he understood all too well. "My father, William, barely shared anything about his own struggles, like he thought I didn't need to know." April remembered the sorrow in Colton's eyes when he mentioned missing his father's final days. She wondered if William Hayes had regrets of his own, unresolved issues with his only son. They sorted the discovered documents into piles. Letters that were still legible, letters too damaged to read, official papers, and personal notes. By late afternoon, the sky had grown a shade darker, and the temperature dipped significantly. April shivered, drawing her jacket closer. "We can't read everything in one go," she said, massaging her temples. "But at least we have them. Maybe we can piece this puzzle together, bit by bit." Colton stood, stretching his stiff back. Agreed. I'll grab a tarp to cover the rest of these boxes. Then we can head home before it gets too cold. As they secured the porch, the Mustang ambled up and gently bumped April's arm with its muzzle. She smiled, stroking Liberty's forehead. A quiet awe settled over her. She still couldn't quite believe a wild horse had played such a pivotal role in her survival and her quest for answers. In that moment, the three of them, two searchers for truth and one untamed guide, seemed bound by an unspoken resolution. They would not abandon this journey, no matter what revelations emerge. Dusk fell quickly as they rode back to the Hayes Ranch, the forest path now more familiar, but no less haunting. The hush among the pines felt alive, as if the towering evergreens were leaning in to overhear snatches of their conversation. Whenever a twig snapped underfoot, both April and Colton reflexively tensed, still battling the lingering echoes of distant battlefields and locked rooms. Their return to the ranch drew the attention of the other horses, who nickered softly at the sight of Liberty trotting proudly near the front. April, dismounting with care, marveled at how naturally their Mustang companion fit into the ranch's rhythm now. Neither fully domesticated nor wholly separate. Liberty would graze with the mares, sometimes allowing a brief nuzzle, then trot off to find its own quiet space. That evening, April spread the newly discovered letters and journal pages across the large scarred wooden table in the ranch's small living room. She and Colton sat on opposite sides, sipping cups of hot tea. A single lamp provided a warm glow, reflecting on the battered leather cover of the journal. From time to time, one of them would pick up a page, read silently, then set it aside with a sigh. At last, Colton spoke up. "Looks like your grandfather tried to run a modest breeding program for quarter horses. He wrote in detail about each foal's markings, disposition, sales value. These records are meticulous. He must have cared a lot about this place. But in the later entries, everything changes. He starts mentioning arguments and money problems. Says he doesn't want to force Thomas into continuing the ranch life if he hates it." April nodded, leafing through a water-stained letter addressed from Thomas to his father. Though parts were illegible, the phrases "I'm done," "never coming back," and "you won't listen" stood out starkly. A pang of sympathy for her father welled in her. He'd evidently felt stifled, maybe even doomed to inherit burdens he never chose. "He must have left under terrible circumstances," she murmured. "Imagine feeling so cornered that you walk away from your entire family for decades." Colton's face softened with understanding. "I can, actually." He paused, a rawness creeping into his voice. "I enlisted the moment I graduated high school. Couldn't wait to escape my father's domain. We barely spoke for years. Every time I came back on leave, it felt like we were strangers." Setting down her tea, April reached across the table and gave his hand a tentative squeeze. "I'm sorry. I wish you'd had more time with him, more chances to talk." He offered a small, appreciative smile, though sadness still flickered behind his eyes. "Me too. I keep thinking, if I'd known he was sick, if I'd made an effort." He shook his head. "Anyway, enough about me. We'll do what we can to help you understand your father's story at least. That counts for something, right?" A rush of gratitude warmed April from the inside. In truth, she felt that understanding Thomas Winslow's past might also guide Colton toward making peace with his own father's memory. They shared a silent moment, letting the lamplight fill the cozy darkness of the room. Eventually, they gathered the documents into a cardboard box for safekeeping. Outside, the wind had picked up, whistling around the eaves. April followed Colton to check on the horses one last time before bed. A crisp moon illuminated the corral, revealing Liberty standing apart, head lifted as though gazing at the stars. She wondered if the horse sensed their emotional weight, almost as if it had brought them this far and was waiting to see if they'd cross the finish line. Morning arrived with a dusting of snow, transforming the ranch into a scene of muted whites and grays. The horses' breaths emerged in cloudy puffs as they nudged at the frosty ground in search of grass. Colton rose early to break ice on the water troughs, then fill them with fresh water. April, bundled in layers, ventured outside soon after, still unused to the Montana chill, but determined to be useful. She helped to spread extra straw in the barn stalls, mindful of her healing body. "We should get more hay," Colton remarked, setting down a pitchfork. "Winter's long out here, and the supply's getting low. Maybe I'll load the truck and head into town later." April brushed a strand of hair from her face, surveying the barn's interior. She noticed an old harness and some moth-eaten blankets shoved into a corner. "I'll come with you. Maybe I can help pick out supplies. Also, I was thinking of checking the local records office to see if there's any official mention of the Winslow place." A subtle hesitation passed over Colton's features, as though he still guarded an inherent self-sufficiency. But he quickly relented. "Sure, having an extra pair of hands might speed things up." So they set off in William Hayes's battered pickup, the old engine complaining about the cold. As the ranch disappeared in the rearview mirror, a faint sense of anticipation thrummed in the air. Though April felt physically stronger, she was keenly aware of how fragile her sense of direction remained. She'd come to Montana seeking closure, but each revelation only spawned new questions. Longview was a small town of modest charm, a single main street with angled parking, a diner called Beau's Place, a hardware store, a cafe, and a few scattered specialty shops. Snow clung to the rooftops, and holiday decorations had begun to appear in windows. The sight of tinsel and wreaths contrasted with the gritty reality that most townspeople here lived off the land or manual labor. They parked outside Montana Feed and Supply, a squat building with hay bales stacked out front. Colton hopped out, greeting the store owner, Gene, who recognized him as William Hayes's son. "Didn't know you'd be back, boy," Gene said, squinting in the bright reflection off the snow. "Heard about your father. Sorry for your loss. We always thought he was a decent man, though a bit reserved." Colton nodded politely, exchanging a few pleasantries. April wandered inside, marveling at how the air smelled of alfalfa, rubber boots, and warm sawdust. While Colton discussed prices for hay and horse feed, she surveyed the aisles for anything they might need: extra blankets, a new shovel, perhaps some protective gear for the barn. When they left with a purchase order to be delivered later, April proposed they swing by the county office. "It's just a few blocks away," she said, tightening her scarf. "Might as well see if they have old property records on file." Colton agreed, though he seemed less enthusiastic, preoccupied with the business of ensuring the ranch would survive the winter. Still, he followed her to a low brick building marked Longview County Administration. Inside, the warmth was a welcome contrast to the biting cold. They found themselves in a cramped records room, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, a staffer named Maisie guiding them to the correct archive cabinets. April explained she was looking for documents related to the Winslow homestead. Maisie tapped at an aging computer, then directed them to a set of worn file boxes. "Not many folks ask about that property," she remarked. "It's been vacant for decades, as far as we know. Good luck. Some of these records go back 50 years or more." April and Colton spent nearly an hour flipping through dog-eared manila folders, scanning property surveys, tax statements, and legal notices. The county kept sporadic records, especially from earlier decades, and water damage had rendered some pages illegible. Still, they unearthed a handful of intriguing documents. One sheet, dated just after World War II, indicated that the Winslow family purchased a sizable tract of land on the outskirts of Longview. Another, from the mid-1970s, showed partial subdivision of that land. Some sold, some retained. A cryptic note in the margin alluded to disputes among heirs. "Look here," April said, pointing to a reference. "Petition for title transfer, 1981. Requesting that the property be placed in the name of Lydia Winslow after Thomas Winslow relinquishes claim." She read further, brow furrowing. "This is only a partial record, but it lines up with the letters suggesting my dad walked away, signing over his inheritance. Lydia, that might be his mother, my grandmother." Her eyes clouded. She knew almost nothing about her grandparents, only that they died sometime in the late 1980s, possibly alone on that property. The weight of generational silence pressed on her. How had so many stories, so many memories been lost? Colton gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's tough piecing together old family feuds like this. If your dad gave up his share, he must have had his reasons. Doesn't mean he didn't care." Nodding, April tucked the document into a folder they planned to take home for further review. "I guess part of me wonders if it was a sacrifice. Maybe he figured I'd have a better life away from the conflicts here." Owetunim, they thanked Maisie for her help and left the county office. Outside, the afternoon sun was already dipping toward the horizon, painting the streets in pale, wintry light. The biting air stung April's cheeks as they made their way back to the pickup. Colton opened the passenger door for her before circling around to the driver's side. He turned the key, and the engine sputtered dramatically before catching. "We should pick up some grocery," he remarked, peering at the gas gauge. "Maybe fill up the tank too." Nodding agreement, April stared out the window at Main Street. A handful of locals bustled in and out of shops. Decorations for the upcoming holiday season glimmered in windows. The faint scent of roasted coffee drifted on the breeze, prompting April to suggest a stop at the brew house, a small cafe next to Beau's place. Inside, they found a cozy interior with a few wooden tables, a chalkboard menu, and potted ferns. The air smelled of cinnamon and espresso. After ordering a pair of hot drinks, they settled at a corner table. "I can't help feeling guilty," April confessed, cupping her hands around the warm mug. "I'm fixing my father's mess, or at least trying to. But maybe if I'd come sooner?" Colton shook his head gently. "You're here now. That's what matters." He sipped his coffee, lips pressing into a thoughtful line. "I keep telling myself the same thing about the ranch. I can't undo the years I spent away, but I can try to make it better." They fell into a companionable silence, each aware of how parallel their experiences were. Two children of complicated fathers, now left to reconcile old wounds on the land that shaped them. In the background, a local radio station played soft country tunes. A waitress approached, refilling their mugs and offering a sympathetic smile. April decided to share a recent realization. "The night you found me, I was so sure no one would. I remember lying on that cold floor thinking, this is how it ends. Then you showed up, all because of a horse." Colton's gaze softened at the memory. "Liberty, yeah. I don't fully understand it, but I'm grateful. That horse changed both our lives." They lingered in the cafe, letting the warmth soothe them. Beyond the frosted windows, Longview went about its day, as if unaware of the quiet transformations unfolding for two of its newest, or perhaps returning residents. After restocking groceries and fueling the pickup, Colton and April made their way back to the Hayes Ranch under a sky streaked with purples and oranges. The winter sun set early, and the temperature plunged accordingly. Yet despite the cold, an undercurrent of hope thrummed between them. They'd uncovered more details about the Winslow family, even if the puzzle remained incomplete. As the truck lurched to a stop near the barn, April spotted Liberty standing by the half-repaired fence that separated the main paddock from a smaller grazing area. The Mustang nickered softly as though greeting them. April could not help but smile. She'd grown fond of the horse's unspoken companionship. Without waiting, Colton grabbed a couple of grocery bags and headed into the house to start dinner, while April took the rest to the small kitchen. She noticed how her presence had gradually left its mark on the space. An extra mug on the counter, a fluffy throw blanket draped over the worn couch, a few simple sketches of horses she'd pinned to a corkboard. These small touches made the once lonely ranch house feel more like a shared home. Over a modest meal of stew and cornbread, they discussed the immediate tasks ahead, arranging for additional hay deliveries, checking the roofs for leaks, and preparing the ranch's plumbing for hard freezes. "We'll need to insulate the pipes in the barn," Colton said between bites. "Last thing we want is a burst pipe in January." April nodded, stirring her spoon. "I can handle some of that. Maybe tomorrow, after we finish sorting more of those Winslow documents." "Yeah," Colton agreed, pushing his empty bowl aside. "Sure, we can tackle both. Might even have time to ride out to the far boundary and see if the fences held up through last night's wind." They cleaned up the kitchen in comfortable silence. In another life, April might have found this domestic routine mundane. But after the trauma she'd experienced, every act felt precious. Warm water running over her hands, the faint squeak of a sponge on a dish, the low murmur of Colton's voice reminding her to watch the edges of a chipped plate. Later, she settled on the couch with a blanket draped over her legs, rummaging through the day's finds in a large cardboard box. Colton sat on the floor, leaning against the couch, scanning old letters by the lamplight. The soft flicker of the fire in the hearth cast dancing shadows on the walls. "Listen to this," Colton said, picking up a letter from the stack they'd brought back. His voice was subdued as he read, "Thomas, you know how I feel about fancy city dreams. But if that's really what you want, I won't stand in your way. I only ask that you remember this land belongs to you too. The door here is always open." It's signed by Lydia Winslow. Your grandmother, I guess. April closed her eyes momentarily, imagining the strained love behind those words. She was pleading with him to stay connected. Maybe Dad was already set on leaving. Maybe by then he'd seen enough arguments to last a lifetime. Colton set the letter aside, looking up at her. Family conflict can run deep. It's hard to break that cycle without somebody stepping in. He paused, voice growing softer. Maybe that somebody is you. By coming back here, maybe you're healing old wounds no one else could. A warmth that had nothing to do with the crackling fire spread through her. In that moment, she realized how intimately their stories overlapped. Colton working to preserve his father's ranch, she delving into her father's severed ties to this very land. The hush between them carried a sense of shared purpose, as though each recognized the role they played in redeeming what was almost lost. The next several days became a whirlwind of activity. Every morning, April rose early, determined to pull her weight despite the lingering ache in her muscles. She helped Colton mend the barn roof, holding a ladder steady while he hammered down loose shingles. Together, they insulated the exposed water pipes with foam sleeves, securing them with duct tape to ward off the creeping cold. On the second morning, a light snow began to fall, prompting them to work faster. The flakes settled on April's hair, quickly melting from the warmth of exertion. When midday arrived, they huddled in the barn for a break, sharing thermoses of hot cocoa that April had prepared. Liberty wandered in, poking its head over a stable door. "That horse is getting bolder," Colton remarked, amused. "Guess it knows it's part of the family now." April offered Liberty a carrot, an offering the Mustang accepted with a dainty nuzzle. She grinned. "Whatever the reason, I'm grateful. None of this would have happened without Liberty." Colton's eyes flickered with a fondness he didn't bother to hide. "We owe that horse, that's for sure." During the afternoons, they returned to the boxes of Winslow letters and records, sorting them meticulously into folders. April set up a makeshift workstation in the living room, her laptop perched on a small desk, a scanner borrowed from the local library to digitize the more fragile pages. She typed notes late into the night, weaving fragments of the family story into a coherent timeline. Bit by bit, a poignant narrative emerged. Lydia and her husband, April's grandparents, had inherited the homestead after World War II, expanding it with modest success. Their son Thomas, April's father, showed little interest in ranch life. He was drawn to city prospects, college, corporate jobs, the cultural scene. Fights about identity, money, and loyalty peppered their correspondence. The final blow seemed to be a legal dispute over inheritance, causing Thomas to sign away his claim and leave for Chicago permanently. Reading these documents, April often felt a dull ache of empathy for all parties. She could see her father's determination to escape and her grandparents' heartbreak in letting him go. Yet no single letter provided the why with complete clarity. It was more a mosaic of unresolved tensions, culminating in a quiet tragedy. One chilly evening, after scanning the last letter, April rubbed her eyes and leaned back in the wooden chair. Colton glanced up from across the room, where he was flipping through an old photo album of the Hayes family. "You look wiped," he remarked, concern woven into his tone. She exhaled, nodding. "Just piecing it all together drains me emotionally. I'm starting to see parallels, how generational expectations can weigh us down. It's almost like your father and my father were running parallel courses without realizing it." He set aside his album, moving to sit beside her. "Maybe we're the ones meant to break the cycle," he said softly. "You know, face these old stories rather than run from them." April offered a tired smile, touched by his sincerity. "I like to think so." She covered his hand with hers. The contact felt natural, a comforting presence amid the swirl of thoughts. "Thank you for letting me do this here, letting me look into my family's past while you're dealing with your own burdens." Colton gently squeezed her hand. "You're not a burden," he insisted, "and it helps me too. Working together makes this ranch feel alive again." Their eyes locked, and for a moment, the hush of the winter night held them in a fragile closeness. The weight of old regrets and fresh hopes mingled in the crackling firelight. Sometimes, April thought, the smallest gestures, like a shared glance or a comforting hand, were the first steps toward healing, both for them and the ancestral wounds they'd inherited. News of their endeavors soon trickled through Longview's tight-knit community. When Colton made a run to the feed store, Jean asked if the city gal was really restoring the Winslow homestead. A local rancher, Martha Reed, dropped by with homemade pastries. curious about the rumor that the Hayes Ranch now harbored a legendary Mustang with near mystical instincts. Even the postman, delivering mail along the dusty road, inquired if a renovation project was underway by the old cabin in the woods. Word spread that April Winslow was not only the woman rescued from the abandoned shack, but also a direct descendant of the original Winslow family. This gave rise to a swirl of local gossip. Some folks expressed admiration for her courage, while others speculated that she aimed to sell the property for quick profit. April couldn't help but find it both amusing and a bit unsettling how fast small-town talk moved. On a brisk afternoon, April received a call from Deputy Cabral. He mentioned that the sheriff's office was wrapping up their investigation of the abandoned cabin, but wanted to confirm if she planned to maintain or demolish it. "We don't want vagrants taking up residence or kids wandering in," Cabral explained. "If you're fixing it, we'd like to know so we can remove it from the list of local hazards." Sitting on the porch steps with her phone pressed to her ear, April stole a glance at Colton, who was grooming one of the older mares near the paddock. "I do plan to renovate it," she told Cabral. "Eventually, it's part of my family's history." Cabral seemed relieved. "That's good. Just be mindful of safety. If you need a permit for structural repairs, the county's got forms. Take care out there, Ms. Winslow." She ended the call, heart pounding with a mix of excitement and trepidation. Renovating the cabin felt like a monumental task, especially in winter. Yet every fiber of her being insisted she do it, turn that place of near death into a testament of perseverance. Late that evening, she shared the idea with Colton, who listened intently while setting logs in the living room fireplace. "Part of me wondered if you'd want to forget that cabin altogether," he admitted, striking a match. "After all, it nearly killed you." April shook her head, hugging her knees on the couch. "That's exactly why I want to fix it. I don't want my father's legacy or my own trauma to end in decay. If the Winslow name is part of this land, I'd rather see it reclaimed than left to rot." Colton rose, dusting off his hands, the fire casting a warm glow across his features. "Then I'll help you. We can start by boarding up the worst sections, then replace the roof, maybe reinforce the foundation. It'll be slow work, but it's doable." Her eyes glistened with gratitude. "Thank you. I can't do it alone. But maybe together, we can make it something worthwhile." A faint smile touched his lips. "Sounds like a plan." They spent the next hour discussing practical steps, hauling debris out, removing moldy boards, salvaging any historic elements worth preserving. April jotted a list of supplies, from nails and lumber to waterproof tarps and respirator masks. The project would require every ounce of determination they had. When the fire had dwindled to embers, they paused. Outside, a solitary breeze brushed the windows. In that hush, April felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was more than a structural restoration. This was about healing generational wounds, transforming a site of despair into a place of hope. And standing with her was Colton, whose own life had been marked by war and loss, yet who kept offering a steady hand day after day. 2 mornings later, they drove out to the Winslow cabin with a borrowed trailer loaded with tools and plywood. The sun rose behind a veil of clouds, promising a cold day, but at least no fresh snowfall. The forest seemed more familiar this time, still and quiet, yet no longer foreboding. The memory of April's entrapment lingered in the back of her mind, but she channeled that unease into determination. Colton backed the trailer as close to the clearing as possible. April hopped out, wearing a sturdy pair of work boots and thick gloves. Together, they began unloading supplies: a crowbar, hammers, nails, a portable generator, and extension cords for electric tools. Liberty, having followed at a distance, watched from the edge of the tree line, ears flicking with every metallic clang. Their first task was clearing away fallen timbers and other debris cluttering the porch and front room. April gasped when she heaved aside a rotten beam and unearthed a rusted horseshoe, blackened with age. "This could be from one of the original horses here," she marveled. She set it aside, making a mental note to preserve it as a piece of family lore. Next, they focused on removing damp, moldy boards from the cabin's interior. Whenever they pried loose a plank, dust and decaying material filled the air, so they wore masks to protect their lungs. The old wallpaper peeled away in broad strips, revealing log walls riddled with holes. April sometimes paused, running her gloved fingers over the grooves, imagining her grandparents brushing past these very walls decades ago. By midday, they'd cleared enough space to set up a makeshift workstation in the front room. Colton dragged in the portable generator, hooking it to a power saw. "We'll cut the replacement boards out here," he explained, raising his voice over the saw's whine as it revved up. "Then we can measure and fit them to patch the worst gaps." While Colton measured and sawed, April hammered new boards into place. The repetitive clang of metal on nails echoed in the small cabin, an oddly soothing rhythm. Each strike felt like a counterpoint to the secrecy and pain the place once embodied, now replaced by purposeful renewal. During a brief break, they stepped outside to drink water and catch their breath. April wiped sweat from her brow, marveling at how quickly physical labor warmed her in spite of the cold. Liberty strolled closer, bobbing its head in what seemed like curiosity. The Mustang sniffed at a pile of discarded boards, then regarded Colton and April with dark, expressive eyes. Colton grinned, patting the horse's neck. "I think it approves," he joked. "Or maybe it's just hoping for a snack." April chuckled. "I'll remember to bring carrots next time." As she spoke, her gaze wandered to the empty clearing around them. She pictured how lonely and decrepit this place once seemed, locked in shadows. Now with clutter clear and repairs underway, the air felt lighter, less haunted. They pressed on until late afternoon, boarding up holes in the walls and patching the roof's gaping section. Exhausted but satisfied, they surveyed their progress. Plywood now covered the collapsed porch corner, offering a safer foundation. Inside, the main room sported fresh supports that no longer threatened to cave beneath a person's weight. "It's going to need a lot more work," Colton warned, rolling up the extension cords. "Insulation, a new roof, better flooring, but at least it's no longer a death trap." April nodded, feeling a profound sense of accomplishment. "One step at a time," she agreed. Beneath her fatigue lay a spark of optimism. Each nail, each board, was an act of reclaiming her family's story. And she wasn't doing it alone. As dusk approached, they loaded their tools back onto the trailer. Liberty followed them to the edge of the trees, tail swishing calmly. Standing side by side, Colton and April turned to look at the cabin's silhouette against the purpling sky. It was still rough, still marred by years of neglect. But it was no longer abandoned. No longer a place of secrets. They drove away with the quiet knowledge that something important had shifted, both in the structure of the building and in the unseen architecture of their own hearts. Winter tightened its grip on Longview as the restoration of the Winslow cabin moved forward. By the time Colton Hayes and April Winslow returned to the site for the second round of major repairs, the forest around them had changed dramatically. Bare branches creaked under the weight of fresh snow, and every step they took left footprints that crunched through an icy top layer. In the nearby clearing, where they'd once toiled over soggy boards and rotted timbers, the ground now lay blanketed in white. Despite the frigid conditions, the cabin's transformation was impossible to ignore. New supports along the porch gave the front of the structure a sturdier profile, and the patched roof no longer sagged precariously. Sheets of fresh lumber, hammered into place by Colton's capable hands, had replaced sections of log walls too warped by time to salvage. It was slow, exacting work. Each board had to be measured, cut, and fitted with care to ensure the cabin didn't lose its rustic character. But the difference was palpable. April had spent the morning inspecting the interior, making note of spots where drafts slipped in through gaps near the floor. Her father's old family homestead would require not just cosmetic changes, but also thorough insulation if they intended to keep it standing for good. That afternoon, she found Colton outside, rummaging through their supply trailer for the correct gauge of nails. Overhead, a sun pale as bleached bone peered through a haze of clouds. "How's it looking inside?" he asked, handing her a small box of nails. His breath frosted in the air between them. April shrugged off the biting cold. "Better than before. I'm thinking we'll need to line the interior walls with something more robust. Maybe reclaimed planks or new insulation boards if we want it livable year-round." She looked at the surrounding landscape. "Though I still haven't decided if I'll ever live here permanently. It might just be a place to visit, a kind of memorial for my family." A gentle understanding passed in Colton's gaze. "That makes sense," he said softly. "After all, it's enough to know it won't be left to rot. You're honoring them, no matter how you use it." They worked side by side for most of the day. At times, the labor grew backbreaking, lifting and fitting cumbersome boards, climbing ladders to secure them, rechecking every measurement. When the chill drove them to near numbness, they'd retreat for a quick break, sipping hot soup from a thermos. Liberty, the Mustang that had started this entire journey, lingered on the periphery. Occasionally, the horse pawed at the snow, foraging for hidden patches of grass. As dusk approached, April and Colton decided to call it quits. They packed the tools away, double-checked that the generator was off, and locked the newly installed door as best they could. The old cabin looked strangely regal in the soft pink glow of the setting sun, its patched porch standing defiantly against the swirl of icy wind. Walking back toward the trailer, they paused to watch Liberty lift its head. The Mustang let out a sharp exhale, nostrils flaring at the scent of coming night. For a moment, the world felt timeless. Footprints in snow, a rescued cabin in the distance, and the profound hush of winter forest. April slipped her gloved hand into Colton's, grateful for the warmth and the sense of shared mission. In that silent unity, they headed home to the Hayes Ranch, resolved to continue this labor of both duty and love. A bitter wind whipped across the open fields of the Hayes Ranch, rattling the old barn doors as Colton guided April through its shadowy interior. One section was dedicated to horse stalls, but a separate space near the back functioned as a makeshift workshop, crammed with lumber scraps, a battered workbench, and an assortment of half-open toolboxes. Overhead, a single bulb cast a dim glow, barely penetrating the gloom of winter's early twilight. "Mind your step," Colton warned, gesturing toward a stray ladder leaning against the wall. "I need to clear this area so we can sort the new shipment of timber. If we keep it outside, it'll freeze or warp." April gave a brisk nod, setting her flashlight aside and slipping off her gloves. "No problem." As she began moving items into neat piles, her breath puffed in short, white bursts. She had grown accustomed to the constant chill, finding ways to focus on productivity rather than the discomfort. Outside, the wind howled and the barn's old timbers groaned in protest. April couldn't help imagining the improvements she'd love to make here too. Reinforcing the roof, adding better insulation, maybe installing a proper drainage system for the horses. But resources were stretched thin. Between the urgent needs of the cabin project and the day-to-day costs of feeding and caring for the ranch animals, it felt like they were forever teetering on the edge. At times, Colton's frustration boiled over in small bursts, a muttered curse when the fence wire snapped, a tense sigh upon receiving another overdue bill. April sensed he was carrying far more weight than he let on. Years of guilt over leaving his father, the challenge of running a ranch with few reliable funds, and the emotional toll of transitioning from marine life to a civilian existence he barely recognized. Yet he rarely voiced complaints, preferring to bury himself in work. As they reorganized the workshop, April lifted a wooden crate containing old ranch ledgers and notebooks from William Hayes's era. She placed it on a shelf, pausing when the corner of a spiral notebook caught her eye. "Hey, what's this?" she murmured, pulling it free. The battered cover bore William's handwriting, "Hayes Ranch, Notes." Inside lay page after page of scrawled entries, mostly feed charts, breeding records, receipts for vet services, but near the back the notes took on a more personal tone. She skimmed a passage. "Son deployed again. Miss him, but don't know how to say it. Heard from Doc Monroe that the roan mare might not last winter." April's heart constricted. She realized these were private reflections, glimpses into William's unspoken worries, both for the ranch and his distant son. She hesitated, unsure if it was her place to read them. As if sensing her uncertainty, Colton stepped over. "Find something." She handed him the notebook, careful. "It's your father's. Didn't mean to pry. Thought you should see it." A mixture of emotion crossed Colton's features: surprise, longing, regret. He flipped through a few pages in silence, lips tightening at certain lines. Eventually, he closed the notebook gently. "Thanks," he said, voice subdued. "I'll look through it later." Sensing the weight in his voice, April returned to organizing tools, giving him space to process. Yet deep inside, she felt a surge of empathy. Both of them were, in one way or another, unraveling a father's secrets through scribbled words left behind. Sometimes those quiet revelations cut deeper than a spoken confession ever could. Days later, a mild break in the weather allowed them a welcome reprieve from the relentless cold. Although the air was still crisp, the biting winds calmed, and the skies cleared into a bright stretch of wintry blue. Taking advantage of this lull, Colton suggested that they gather some of the ranch horses for an extended ride around the property, a chance to inspect fence lines, check for fallen branches, and ensure none of the local wildlife had caused damage. April eagerly agreed. She'd come to love these rides as both practical chore and emotional solace. In the saddle, it was easier to breathe, to think. She could feel her father's presence in the land beneath her horse's hooves. Colton saddled up his sturdy bay mare, Autumn, while April chose Comet, a gentle, dapple-gray gelding that had taken a liking to her calm demeanor. Liberty, true to form, lingered a short distance away, watching with alert curiosity. Half an hour later, the two of them rode side by side into the back pastures. The snow wasn't too deep, so the horses managed an even gait. In places, the ground lay bare, where wind had swept it clear, exposing dormant grass and patches of dirt. Here and there, they paused to retie a bit of broken wire or pick up scattered branches that threatened to entangle a horse's legs. As they made their way across a small ridge, April looked out at the expanse of rolling hills and skeletal trees. "It's so quiet," she said, voice hushed. "Peaceful, but lonely too." Colton glanced around, remembering how different the ranch felt when he was a boy, full of stable hands, neighbors stopping by, and his father orchestrating a flurry of activity. "Yeah," he agreed. "My dad used to talk about building a new barn, expanding the breeding program. It never happened. I guess we both got sidetracked by life." They pressed onward until they reached a secluded stretch near the property's western boundary, where a broad stream cut through a shallow ravine. The water's surface was partially iced over, gurgling faintly as it wove among jagged rocks. Nearby stood the old fence that had rotted away, one of many projects that required attention. Dismounting, Colton motioned for April to do the same. The horses nosed at the thin grass, while Liberty, having followed at a distance, appeared from behind a line of pine trees. April laughed softly as the Mustang trotted closer, ears perked. "It's like he's checking up on us," she said. Kneeling by the fence, Colton tested a few posts. "We could salvage some of these, but most are too far gone. We'll need new lumber, new wire. It's going to cost more than I have right now." April caught the tension in his voice. She knew finances weighed heavily on him. The cost of feed, veterinary care, winter supplies, and the ongoing cabin project had chipped away at whatever cushion the ranch once had. She reached out, laying a hand on his shoulder. "We'll figure it out," she said, calm yet resolute. "You're not doing this alone anymore." He looked up at her, gratitude mingling with a touch of vulnerability. "I know. Thank you." In that quiet moment, Liberty stepped forward, snorting softly as if in agreement. April pressed her hand against the Mustang's warm neck. The synergy of man, woman, and horse radiated a gentle solidarity. For a flicker of time, the burdens of inheritance, finances, and family strife lifted, replaced by the simple truth of shared commitment. Returning to the ranch house that afternoon, they found an unexpected visitor waiting by the porch. Dr. Helena Rowe, the physician who had treated April at the hospital weeks ago. She stood bundled in a thick parka, hands shoved into her coat pockets, eyeing the snowy yard with a half-amused expression. April dismounted and hurried over, concern evident on her face. "Dr. Rowe, is everything okay?" The older woman smiled reassuringly. "Everything's fine. I was in the area doing a home visit for another patient and thought I'd check in on you. Didn't realize you'd be off exploring the great outdoors." Her gaze drifted past April to Colton, who led the horses toward the barn. "Also wanted to see how your living situation is here. Looks like you're settling in." April nodded, her cheeks flushing a bit from the ride and the lingering vestiges of winter chill. "I'm doing well, thanks to Colton. And Liberty, of course." She briefly explained their progress on the cabin restoration, how she was physically recovering and gaining strength. Dr. Rowe's eyes sparkled with interest. "I'm glad to hear it. You're a minor legend at the hospital, you know. The woman who survived in that abandoned shack, rescued by a wild Mustang. You might end up in some local folklore at this rate." April laughed softly. though a twinge of discomfort prickled at the back of her mind. She didn't relish being a spectacle, yet she was grateful for the improved health that allowed her to stand here and chat, rather than languish in a hospital bed. As they walked toward the barn, Dr. Rowe asked about the ranch's winter preparations. April explained that money was tight, but they were making do with prudent resource management. "We've had generous neighbors," she added, recalling how some folks from Longview had donated leftover materials or offered manual help from time to time. "We're stretching every dollar." When they reached the barn, Colton had just finished unsaddling the horses. The musty warmth of hay and animal breath contrasted sharply with the icy outdoors. Dr. Rowe greeted Colton with a polite nod, then approached the stall where Liberty was nibbling on a flake of hay. "That's the famous horse," she remarked, carefully extending a hand. Liberty sniffed her fingers, then returned to its meal, apparently unperturbed by strangers. "Quite a story you two have." Colton shrugged. "Yeah, it's been a ride. Didn't see my life going this way, but I'm not complaining. Every day's a chance to learn something new." Dr. Rowe's gaze flicked between him and April, a thoughtful smile tugging at her lips. "You both seem in better spirits than when I last saw you. Less haunted. Keep at it. Healing isn't just a physical thing. It's emotional too, sometimes even spiritual." With that, she bid them farewell, promising to remain available if April needed any follow-up care. After she left, a hush settled in the barn. April leaned her head against Liberty's flank, inhaling the earthy smell of horse and straw. She realized how far she'd come from that terrified moment locked in the cabin, unsure if she'd see another sunrise. "Do you ever think about how much has changed?" she asked Colton quietly. "A few months ago, I didn't even know your name. Now, I can't imagine not having you here." He looked at her, expression earnest. "Yeah, I think about it," he said softly, "and I'm grateful every time." They lingered in that stillness, letting gratitude take form in the silence. Gratitude for survival, companionship, and the steadfast presence of a horse who, for reasons they might never fully grasp, refused to let them walk their paths alone. That evening, after a simple dinner of canned stew and fresh bread from a local bakery, April and Colton retreated to the living room. The old brick fireplace, which Colton had painstakingly repaired, glowed with a low, steady fire. Outside, the wind rattled window panes, as though winter wanted to remind them of its unyielding presence. Curled up under a thick blanket, April scanned a few newly uncovered letters from her father's trunk. While the earliest ones detailed tension and resentment toward ranch life, a series of later letters, mostly unsent drafts, suggested he sometimes yearned to reconcile. One draft in particular caught her attention. "Dear Mother, dear Father, I regret many things. I only hope you can forgive me." His tone sounded weary, almost defeated, as he wrote of city pressures and a persistent longing for open skies. Watching April's face tighten at the words, Colton set down William's notebook, which he had been reading. "You all right?" he asked gently. She took a shaky breath. "I'm okay, just he might have tried to come back eventually, or at least wanted to, but neither side ever made the first move. It's sad, really." "Sure." Colton nodded, gaze drifting to his father's scrawled pages lying on the coffee table. "I see the same pattern in my dad's notes. He cared more than he let on. One entry is about me missing a flight home on leave. He wrote he was worried I'd never show up again. Another mentions a local rumor that I'd re-enlisted for longer than planned. But he never said these things to my face." Their eyes met, and April saw a mirror of her own emotions. Regret, empathy, and a simmering determination to honor what remained of their father's legacies. In a moment of silent consensus, they set aside the letters and notebooks, deciding it was enough dwelling on ghosts for one night. Instead, April moved to the old record player in the corner, an antique item she'd stumbled upon while rummaging through the ranch's neglected storage. She coaxed it into life, and a soft, crackling country tune filled the room. The music's gentle twang offered comfort, a melodic reminder of simpler times they'd never truly known. "Dance with me?" she asked impulsively, standing in front of the fireplace. Colton paused, eyes widening in mild surprise, but a slow smile curved his lips. "I'm not much of a dancer," he confessed, rising from his chair. "You'll do fine," she teased, slipping one hand into his and resting the other on his shoulder. The warmth of the fire combined with the closeness of their bodies to banish the winter cold, if only for a moment. They swayed in easy steps, the record's faint hisses blending with the crooning lyrics about wide prairies and heartbreak. In that small circle of lamplight and dancing fire shadows, the hardships of the ranch, the weight of lost years and the uncertainties of the future receded. What remained was two people learning to trust again. Him, after a life of war and estrangement, her after nearly dying alone in a forgotten corner of the woods. When the song ended, Colton gently cupped her face. For a heartbeat, their shared breath hovered in the hush. Then, with a closeness that felt both inevitable and surreal, he leaned in. Their lips met in a tender, unhurried moment, as though every unspoken promise passed between them in that single gesture. A log cracked in the fireplace, sending a swirl of sparks up the chimney. Outside, the winter wind sighed, unheard. For the first time in a long while, both April and Colton felt truly at home. Over the next week, an unspoken shift colored their daily routines. The ranch's chores took on an almost companionable air of partnership, feeding horses, chopping firewood, checking on repairs. Between them passed small touches, shared smiles, and deeper conversations about the future. Though neither explicitly labeled what they had, a sense of closeness blossomed in the hush of winter's hold. Now that April's physical strength was nearly back to normal, she dedicated more hours to the cabin project. On a clear afternoon, she secured permission from the county to proceed with structural changes. The clerk, a wiry man named Harold Givens, raised an eyebrow at her plan to restore a dilapidated cabin in the dead of winter. "I'd wait for spring if I were you," he said, pushing the forms across his counter. "But if you've got the grit, more power to you." April's determination solidified. She realized that in some ways, pushing through winter was symbolic. Her father's story had been frozen in time. It was up to her to thaw it, bring it back to life. By restoring the cabin now, she wasn't merely fixing a building, she was healing a severed line of her family tree. Colton, for his part, continued juggling ranch responsibilities. A late-night phone call from the local feed supplier confirmed a new challenge. Feed prices had surged, and deliveries were delayed by harsh weather conditions. The weight of these financial realities gnawed at him. Some nights she found him poring over ledgers at the kitchen table, frustration etched into his brow. Yet the two found solace in each other's presence and in the ceaseless devotion of liberty. The Mustang had transitioned from an almost mythical figure to a steadfast ally. It roamed the ranch freely, forging a peculiar bond with both Colton and April. Sometimes Liberty would greet them with a soft nicker at dawn, then disappear until dusk. Other times it would stand sentinel while they worked, as though offering silent support. One bright morning, April decided to take Liberty to a local veterinarian for a general checkup. Dr. Aaron Holt, whom they had consulted once before, agreed to meet at his small clinic on the edge of town. Colton helped coax Liberty into a borrowed horse trailer. No easy feat, given the Mustang's natural wariness of confined spaces. After about 20 minutes of gentle persuasion and a few carrots, Liberty reluctantly stepped in. The clinic was modest but well-equipped. Dr. Holt examined Liberty thoroughly, checking teeth, coat condition, and hooves. April noticed a faint scar near the horse's shoulder and asked about it. Dr. Holt frowned, running his gloved finger over the old mark. "It looks like it could have been from barbed wire or maybe an old harness." April's brow furrowed. "You mean Liberty might have been owned before? Used for ranch work or something?" "Possibly," Dr. Holt replied, "but it's hard to say. No microchip, no brand that I can see. Whoever had him either let him go or lost him a long time ago." After giving Liberty a clean bill of health, the vet leaned in conspiratorially. "He's in fine shape, especially for a once wild Mustang. Don't let him go anytime soon. This horse might just be your lucky charm." April grinned at the thought, remembering her rescue from that dark cabin. "Trust me," she said, gently stroking Liberty's muzzle. "I don't plan on it." Later, as she guided Liberty back into the trailer, her mind flickered to the notion that maybe Liberty had been wandering as aimlessly as she had before fate crossed their paths. Whatever destiny bound them, she was grateful it had led to safety, for both horse and human. That same afternoon, while April and Liberty were at the clinic, Colton received an unexpected visit at the ranch. An older gentleman in a worn sheepskin coat drove up in a battered pickup, stepping out onto the gravel driveway with the hesitancy of someone who hadn't set foot here in years. Colton paused in the middle of stacking firewood, eyeing the newcomer. "Hello there," the man greeted, voice gruff but polite. "Name's Walter Denver. I worked with your father long ago. Heard you were back, trying to keep this place running." Colton set aside his axe, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cold. "That's right, I'm Colton Hayes. Good to meet you." Walter surveyed the barns, the fields, and the house with an expression that mingled nostalgia and sadness. "I used to help your dad break horses back in the day. Learned a lot from him. William Hayes was a tough man, but had a good heart. We drifted apart when I moved to the other side of the county." "Dad didn't talk much about the old days," Colton said softly. "I'm discovering all sorts of things he never mentioned." Walter inhaled sharply, nodding. "He was private, that's for sure. Listen, I won't beat around the bush. I heard you might be struggling financially to keep this ranch afloat. Figured I'd offer a hand. I've got some extra bales of hay, a couple of old horses that need stabling for the winter. If you're willing, I'll pay you a fair rate to board them, and you can use the hay for your stock as well." Colton's eyes widened. He had never expected a lifeline to appear in such a straightforward way. Boarding horses could bring in badly needed income, and additional hay would be a blessing. The risk, of course, was whether or not the old barn was up to code for extra animals. They were short on staff, but with April's help, maybe they could manage. "That's extremely kind," Colton managed after a moment. "But are you sure?" Walter's weathered face creased in a small grin. "Yeah, I'm sure. Think of it as me returning a favor to your dad. He helped me once when I was down on my luck, years ago. Besides, neighbors got to help neighbors out here." Before Colton could respond, Liberty let out a distant neigh. The Mustang had returned with April, trotting into the yard behind the horse trailer. Walter's gaze shifted to the striking animal, his eyebrows shooting up. "That the Mustang folks keep talking about?" Colton watched as April hopped down from the truck, carefully leading Liberty. "The very one," he said, pride evident in his tone. "We call him Liberty. Rescued April out in the woods a while back." Walter let out a low whistle. "Impressive. Heard the tales in town, but I never believed it. Horse must like you." April approached, curious about the visitor. Colton quickly introduced her, then explained Walter's proposal. A spark of hope flickered in April's eyes. She extended her hand, thanking Walter for his generosity. "Well," Walter said, tipping his hat, "let's just say I want to see Hayes Ranch keep going, for old time's sake. And from what I hear, you two are working miracles already with a bit of help from that horse." The three of them strolled into the barn to check the facilities. Inside, the air carried the scent of fresh straw and livestock, a reminder that, despite hardships, the ranch was far from dead. In that moment, Colton felt an unfamiliar surge of optimism. Maybe, just maybe, they could keep this place alive. Within days, Walter Denver's two older mares arrived, along with a small trailer of hay bales. In exchange for boarding and care, Walter paid a modest monthly fee that helped offset some of Colton's mounting bills. Every evening, Colton meticulously logged the new expenses and income in the old ledger, amazed to see how even a small gesture of goodwill could tip the scales back towards solvency. April, meanwhile, found renewed energy for the cabin renovation. The slight improvement in the ranch's financial situation allowed her to purchase more supplies without guilt. She contracted two local handymen, Jesse and Marcus, to assist with the trickier aspects of structural reinforcement. Throughout the day, the cabin bustled with the rhythmic hammering of nails, the whir of a portable saw, and occasionally the shouts of, "Watch your step," whenever someone toted a heavy plank inside. "Who'd have thought we'd make so much progress in the dead of winter?" April remarked to Jesse during a quick coffee break. They stood on the porch, surveying the newly bolstered roof frame. "When I first saw this place, I was half dead, and it looked like it wouldn't last another season." Jesse, a broad-shouldered man in his 40s, chuckled. "You've got grit, Ms. Winslow. Most folks would have bulldozed this thing by now, but I'll admit it, it's shaping up." While the construction advanced, April spent her evenings meticulously sorting through the Winslow family letters. She'd begun composing a personal journal that blended her own reflections with excerpts from those decades-old missives. It read like a patchwork memoir: her father's voice, her grandparents' pleas, her own modern commentary on what it all meant. Some nights Colton would sit beside her on the worn sofa, reading over her shoulder, offering a quiet nod or a gentle squeeze of her hand whenever a passage struck home. One cold, clear night, April decided to venture back to the cabin alone. The construction crew had gone home, and Colton was tending a late evening chore in the barn. Carrying a small lantern and wrapped in a thick coat, she made her way through the moonlit forest, Liberty trailing behind her at a contented walk. The hush of the trees seemed friendly now, no longer the menacing silence she remembered from her imprisonment. She entered the cabin and set her lantern on a newly installed windowsill. Fresh insulation lined the walls, and temporary wooden planks covered the floor's worst gaps. Though still rough, the space felt undeniably revived. She ran her gloved fingers along a sturdy support beam, taking in the scent of cut wood and the faint tang of lingering sawdust. A sudden noise startled her, a shifting sound near the old fireplace. She turned sharply, heart hammering. Her lantern's glow revealed a dislodged stone in the hearth's back wall, partially exposing a hidden recess. Carefully, she pried the stone free, revealing a small cavity. Inside lay a tin box, dusty and sealed. Trembling with curiosity, April eased the box out and unlatched its rusted clasp. Within lay a few faded photographs, a ring, and a folded letter. She carefully spread the letter on a windowsill to read. The handwriting was shaky but legible. "To my son Thomas, I pray you find this someday." Her breath caught. This was a direct message from her grandfather or grandmother, hidden away for years. She skimmed the lines, an outpouring of regret, love, and an admission of fault for driving Thomas away. The letter closed with a wish that one day the Winslow family would unite again on this land, free from the bitterness that once consumed them. Eyes burning, April realized she was holding a final piece of her family's puzzle. She pressed the letter to her chest, feeling the weight of lost decades and longing. In the lantern's glow, Liberty nudged her shoulder as if to say, "You're not alone here," and she believed it. The discovery of that hidden letter ignited a new resolve in April. Back at the ranch, she shared its contents with Colton, reading aloud each poignant line. He listened, eyes somber, and when she finished, he wrapped her in a firm embrace. "So they did want him to come back," he said softly. "They just never knew how to say it." April nodded against his shoulder, tears lingering in the corners of her eyes. "It's heartbreaking that it stayed hidden for so long, but at least it's out now." They agreed to incorporate the letter into the memorial corner April intended to create within the cabin, a small nook displaying photographs, cherished objects, and writings from various generations. She dreamed of visitors stepping in and feeling not just the sorrow of the cabin's history, but also a rekindled hope that broken bonds could heal. As the cabin neared structural completion, word spread through Longview that Winslow's Haven, as some folks were calling it, would soon stand as a testament to both local history and personal redemption. A few curious town residents stopped by during construction, offering to donate old furniture or historical trinkets. Even Clara, owner of the local cafe, brought hot coffee and pastries one chilly afternoon, exclaiming that she wanted to see for herself the building that came back to life along with that Mustang miracle. Meanwhile, Walter Denver's mares settled comfortably at the Hayes Ranch, and the extra income from their boarding fees allowed Colton to hire a part-time ranch hand, Devin, a lanky teenager looking to earn money on weekends. With Devin's help, the day-to-day tasks felt less overwhelming. Colton also made plans to revive a small-scale horse training program, something his father once excelled at. If it succeeded, the ranch might regain its footing completely. One evening after a full day of cabin work, April and Colton returned to the ranch house to find Devin brushing down the horses. "You've got visitors," the young man said with a grin, jerking a thumb toward the living room window. "They're waiting inside." Puzzled, April and Colton exchanged looks before stepping into the house. There, seated on the old couch, were Deputy Cabral and Maisie from the county administration office. Both appeared relaxed, sipping mugs of coffee April had left brewing. "Didn't expect to see you two together," Colton greeted, trying to mask his curiosity. Maisie lifted her mug in a playful salute. "Deputy Cabral stopped by the office with some questions about the Winslow property, and I thought I'd tag along. I wanted to talk to you both about an idea." Cabral set his mug on the side table. We know you're close to finishing the cabin, and folks in town are mighty interested in its history, especially the rescue story. Some of us were thinking, how about a small open house? Nothing big, just a community event to let people see what's been done. It'd help everyone appreciate the property and maybe quell rumors. April's eyebrows shot up. An open house? In winter? Maisie shrugged. Montanans are used to a bit of cold. It'd be a chance for you to share your family's story, maybe show off some of those letters and artifacts you've gathered, and it might be good for the Hayes Ranch too, Colton. Folks would see how hard you're working, might even spark more local support. Colton exchanged a glance with April. An open house at the near-complete cabin, inviting half the town to witness what had once been a place of personal sorrow. The idea felt daunting, yet something in their shared look communicated possibility. We'll need to think about it, April said, a wave of nerves and excitement mingling in her voice. But it could be a good thing. Cabral smiled, rising from the couch. Just let us know. Folks are more eager to help than you might think. With that, they finished their coffee, leaving April and Colton to mull over the prospect of turning Winslow's Haven into a beacon of community interest. After a night of deliberation, April and Colton decided to go for it. The chance to host an open house at the cabin could bring closure to her father's story, shine a positive light on the Hayes Ranch, and perhaps even ignite new friendships within Longview. They settled on a date 2 weeks away, gambling that the winter weather wouldn't unleash a blizzard on that specific day. Word spread quickly, thanks to Clara's Cafe and the informal but effective pipeline of small-town gossip. Within days, people were talking about the big reveal at Winslow's Haven. Jesse and Marcus worked overtime to finalize last-minute construction details, installing a proper front door, adding a rudimentary heating system, and setting up a temporary walkway over any icy spots. April spent hours arranging the interior. She hung a few framed photographs she'd restored, one of her grandparents standing by a horse corral, another of her father as a boy. She set up a simple display of old letters in a clear plastic case, plus the newly discovered hidden letter in a place of honor near the fireplace. Meanwhile, Colton concentrated on ensuring the ranch chores were up to date, so he could devote the open house day to welcoming visitors. Devin helped him decorate the ranch's main entrance with a few evergreen boughs and simple wooden signs pointing the way to Winslow's cabin. Liberty, as though sensing the occasion, paraded around the yard with a lift in its step, occasionally beckoning the attention of passers-by. The morning of the event dawned crisp and bright, a thin layer of frost glittering on every surface. Colton and April woke before sunrise, nerves dancing in their stomachs. They dressed in warm layers, Colton donning a thick flannel jacket, April slipping on a cozy knit sweater and woolen hat. Over a quick breakfast, they exchanged anxious smiles, each silently wondering how the day would unfold. Just after 10 o'clock, the first visitors began trickling in. Maisie arrived with a bundle of pamphlets about local history, while Deputy Cabral directed cars to a makeshift parking area near the ranch's corral. Clara from the cafe showed up with 2 large thermoses of hot cocoa and a plate of freshly baked cookies. Even Dr. Rowe made an appearance, giving April a friendly wave as she ambled toward the cabin. April found herself playing the role of tour guide. Standing just inside the cabin's threshold, she welcomed people in small groups, explaining how the place looked before renovation. She guided them to the memorial corner, pointing out photographs and explaining snippets of her father's story, how he left, how he'd nearly reconciled, and how she discovered the family's hidden letter. Some listeners grew misty-eyed, murmuring their condolences and admiration for her dedication. Colton, meanwhile, meandered through the cabin, answering questions about the structural work. The father of a local 4-H teenager asked for tips on winterizing old farm buildings. Another couple wondered if he might be interested in training their unruly mare. Each conversation held the possibility of forging new bonds, new opportunities. At one point, a group of children, bundled in puffy coats, giggled and whispered about the magic Mustang. Liberty obliged by standing near the entrance, allowing gentle pats on its muzzle. One small girl, eyes wide with wonder, declared she wanted to grow up and be a horse rescuer just like Miss Winslow. The innocence of that statement made April's heart lurch with gratitude. She crouched down, offering a soft answer that dreams can come true if we treat animals, and each other, with kindness. By midday, the cabin felt comfortably crowded, filled with the hum of conversation and the occasional squeak of boots on wooden floors. Sunlight streamed through the newly installed windows, illuminating the corners that once lay in darkness. Amid the chatter, April and Colton stole a moment to exchange a glance, equal parts relief and joy. Winslow's Haven was no longer just a relic of a broken family. It had become a living space where hope and reconciliation thrived. As afternoon turned to evening, the open house began winding down. People said their goodbyes with genuine warmth, praising the work done on the cabin. Clara left behind her empty thermoses, promising to refill them next time. Dr. Rose slipped out after a few final words of encouragement to April. Even Deputy Cabral stayed to help gather stray cups and napkins, grinning as he confessed that this was one of the most uplifting community events he'd seen in a while. Eventually, only a handful of visitors remained, chatting in low voices near the memorial corner. Colton and April exchanged tired smiles, leaning against the rebuilt mantel, enjoying a moment of relative quiet. The last rays of winter sun slanted through the window, stretching shadows across the floor. "Look at that," April said, glancing around. "I never imagined this place could feel so alive." Colton followed her gaze. The sturdy beams overhead, the new door that didn't squeak in protest, the framed photographs that linked past and present. "You did that," he murmured. "Your determination, your faith in what this place could be." April shook her head gently. "Our determination," she corrected. "I couldn't have done any of it without you." Spurner. From just outside the cabin's threshold, Liberty let out a soft whicker, as if adding its own approval. April laughed, moving to scratch the horse's neck. "And without you, too, my friend," she added, her voice catching slightly at the memory of that desperate night so long ago. Or so it felt. She turned back to Colton, warmth in her eyes. "I want to make this official," she said, rummaging in her coat pocket to produce a folded piece of paper. "It's a form transferring partial ownership of the cabin property to you. I figure if I'm going to keep it as a historical site or memorial, I want your name on it too." His eyes widened in surprise. "Wait, what? You're serious?" She nodded, stepping closer so their faces were a breath apart. "Your father's spirit is in this land as much as my family's. You saved me. You helped rebuild this place. We're partners in every sense." Emotion rippled across Colton's features. He took the paper with care, scanning the text. "April, I don't know what to say. That's a big deal." "It is," she agreed, voice gentle but firm. "But this cabin, this ranch, it's not just about the past anymore. It's about what we're building for the future, together." He glanced at the memorial corner, then back at her. In that quiet instance, the magnitude of everything they'd endured, from her near-death rescue to the shared heartbreak over their father's choices, converged in a single sense of belonging. "I'll sign it," he said, swallowing the thickness in his throat, with gratitude. They heard the last of the visitors leaving, footprints crunching in snow as the cabin door swung shut. April and Colton stood in the hush, illuminated by the soft glow of a hanging lamp and the near-finished fireplace that once concealed a hidden letter. Liberty, still lingering by the threshold, snorted softly, then trotted off into the twilight. April took Colton's hand. "Let's step outside," she said. "There's one more thing I want to see." They moved on to the newly rebuilt porch, exhaling puffs of white into the cold evening air. Overhead, a tapestry of stars twinkled in the deep purple sky. The moon hung low, casting a silvery sheen on the surrounding trees. April slipped her arm around Colton's waist, nestling close. "This moment," she whispered, "is everything I hoped for, but never thought I'd find. Peace, connection, the chance to start fresh." He pressed a gentle kiss to her hair. "I feel it too," he replied, "and I think our fathers, both of them, would be proud of what we've made here." Standing on the porch of a cabin once marked by abandonment and despair, they recognized the power of second chances. They'd reclaimed a piece of lost history, forged new bonds with the community, and found a shared future neither had expected. For the first time in decades, the Winslow cabin, now lovingly dubbed Winslow's Haven, shone with light, laughter, and the promise of renewal. And at the heart of it all was the wild Mustang, that silent herald of hope, grazing somewhere beneath the Montana stars. In the hush of winter's night, April and Colton held each other close, listening to the soft hush of wind through pine needles. There were still fences to mend, debts to pay, and uncertainties to face, but together they had learned to trust in the quiet miracles that can emerge when people dare to follow an unlikely guide. The future stretched ahead, as vast and open as the snow-draped plains, beckoning them onward with a promise of healing and a freedom that only the wide Montana sky and a loyal, untamed horse could truly bestow. In the end, beneath the vast Montana sky, a broken man, a determined woman, and a wild Mustang found redemption together, reclaiming a legacy nearly lost forever. This unforgettable tale proves it's never too late for courage, forgiveness, and new beginnings. The kind of timeless American values captured by legends like Clint Eastwood and John Wayne. Through grit, community, and the spirit of resilience, they've turned an abandoned cabin into a beacon of hope and healing. Now, we'd love to hear from you. What's your take on this remarkable journey? Could you have imagined an ending like this? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, share this video with your friends, and make sure you're subscribed. There are more amazing stories on the way. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next unforgettable adventure.